The courtroom buzzed with a low hum, a place where stories were twisted, truths buried, and reputations made or destroyed in minutes. People filed in, some curious, some indifferent, and some carrying the weight of the cases that brought them there. Among them was a woman, composed, silent, and striking in her presence. She was black, dressed modestly, not flashy, but there was something about the way she walked. Graceful, grounded. She didn't say much, didn't raise her eyes often, and certainly didn't make a show of who she was. To the officers seated across the room, though, she looked ordinary. Just another name on the docket. Just another defendant to deal with. Another face they could walk over, dismiss, or, in this case, lie about. But oh, how wrong they were. Detective Harris, a middle-aged white officer with a reputation for pushing boundaries, sat comfortably at the witness bench. He adjusted his badge slightly, as if reminding everyone in the room that he wore authority on his chest. Then he pointed toward her, the quiet woman seated beside her attorney. "That's her," he said. She resisted. She became aggressive, belligerent. I warned her multiple times. She refused lawful instructions. There was a murmur in the room. Her attorney raised an eyebrow, scribbled something quickly on a notepad, and nudged it toward her. She read it, then looked up, still not speaking, just watching. "She became violent when we asked for ID," Harris continued. "She threatened me. Lies, word after word, crafted with the ease of someone who'd done it before." The room couldn't see it yet, but the truth was about to explode in a way none of them expected. The judge, a stoic woman in her 50s, flipped through a stack of papers. She frowned at the inconsistent timestamps. "And where exactly did this take place?" "In the parking lot outside Westwood Plaza," Harris replied. "She was parked illegally." I approached politely. She instantly became combative. All eyes moved toward the woman. Still silent, still composed. But inside her mind, the memories of that day played like a film on loop. She had pulled into that plaza not for shopping or loitering, but for surveillance. She was on assignment, a highly confidential one. She was undercover, and this officer, this man currently perjuring himself under oath, had not only disrespected her position, he had disrespected her very identity. He hadn't known who she was that day. Just a black woman in a car. He didn't ask questions, didn't check credentials, didn't follow protocol. He assumed, as many do, that he could intimidate, harass, and later build a story around his assumption. A story that would work because it always did. Her name? Major Lila Thompson, a 17-year veteran of law enforcement, a high-ranking intelligence officer, former military, trusted with operations Harris couldn't even spell. But none of that mattered the day he saw her. He saw color, not credentials. He saw what he wanted to see, someone to dominate. And now, he was sitting in a courtroom, lying to a judge about a woman who outranked every officer in that building. But still, she stayed silent. The audience in the room couldn't yet feel the storm brewing, but her lawyer could. He'd seen the folder in her bag. He'd read the title. He knew the moment to strike wasn't now, but it was coming. Harris leaned forward again, smug in his narrative. She yelled, "You don't know who I am." She tried to pull something from her coat. "I feared for my safety." Another lie, one that would cost him more than he could ever imagine. The judge raised her hand. "We'll pause this for a short recess. I want to review body cam footage and incident reports." The courtroom began to shuffle. She stood slowly, straightened her coat, picked up the folder she brought, and just before she exited, she glanced, briefly, at Harris. It was a look he didn't understand, but it chilled him, because for the first time, something in his gut whispered, "You messed with the wrong one." And he had no idea just how wrong that mistake would turn out to be. The courtroom reconvened 30 minutes later, and though the room was the same, the atmosphere had changed. The air was denser, charged, as though everyone sensed something was coming, but couldn't quite name it. Detective Harris returned to his seat, smug as ever. He didn't notice how the clerk's tone had slightly shifted, or how the judge now looked at him more carefully. He was still confident in his script, the one he'd perfected over years of getting away with what others would be fired for. Meanwhile, the woman, Lila, now held a different folder in her hands. It was black, leather-bound, and sealed with a golden emblem that only a few would recognize at first glance. But it wasn't time to open it yet. The judge spoke first. "Detective Harris, I've reviewed your statement and the preliminary report. There are inconsistencies I'd like to clarify before we proceed." Harris leaned forward again. "Of course, Your Honor. You stated that Ms. Thompson," the judge paused here, eyeing the name with curiosity, "refused to identify herself." "That's correct. No badge, no credentials, nothing." "She claimed to be someone important," he chuckled. "But I've heard that story before. People pretending to be lawyers, agents. Happens all the time." The judge's brows knit tighter. "I also noticed," she continued, "that your body cam was turned off during most of the incident. Care to explain?" Now Harris hesitated. "A little. It malfunctioned. A very convenient malfunction," the judge noted coldly. "Considering this is the 5th such instance logged under your name in under 2 years." The gallery started to whisper. Lila remained still, but her attorney leaned in now. It was time. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth but commanding, "with your permission, we would like to submit verified surveillance footage from the Westwood Plaza parking lot. This footage was not provided by the department. It was independently obtained, and we believe it will directly contradict the witness testimony." The room fell silent. The judge gave a sharp nod. "Proceed." A large screen was wheeled in. The lights dimmed. And then play. The footage was clear, better than most dash or body cams. A wide-angle shot of the entire lot. And in it, you could see Lila's vehicle parked precisely within the lines. No signs of illegal parking. Then came Harris. He approached the car, but his stance was aggressive from the start. No calm tone, no warning, just waving, yelling, pointing. She exited the car slowly. Calm, hands visible, no shouting, no resisting. The entire gallery now leaned forward, some with mouths open. Then came the moment Harris had claimed she lunged for something. But in the footage, she simply reached into her coat pocket, slowly, and pulled out what looked like a slim black wallet. The camera caught it perfectly. She flipped it open. And even though the image wasn't close enough to read the badge, its shine under the sunlight was unmistakable. A federal badge. The courtroom gasped. Detective Harris went pale. The judge froze the video. "Detective, would you care to explain what this is?" Silence. Harris looked down, then back up. I didn't see that at the time." "That's odd," the judge replied coolly, "because you mentioned in your report that she reached into her coat and you feared she was pulling a weapon. But now we clearly see a badge, not a gun." More silence. Lila's attorney stood again. "Your Honor, may I now formally request to submit my client's credentials for the court record?" "Granted." He turned to her. "Major." That one word, Major, echoed like thunder through the room. Lila stood, calm, poised. She approached the bench, opened her leather folder, and handed the judge a neatly stacked set of documents. "Major Lila M. Thompson," her attorney declared. 17 years in federal law enforcement. Department of Defense Intelligence. Former Special Ops. Currently assigned to a classified multi-agency task force. That day, she was operating in an undercover capacity on a federal-level investigation. She was surveilling a suspect 2 lots over when she was aggressively approached and accused by this officer, without any probable cause or lawful reason. The judge skimmed the documents. Her face changed. The courtroom was stunned. Harris looked as if the floor beneath him had vanished. His badge felt heavy on his chest now, not as a symbol of pride, but as a mark of arrogance now exposed. The judge looked up slowly. "Major Thompson, is everything in this documentation accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lila replied, her voice calm, strong, unshaken. "And you attempted to identify yourself on the scene?" "I did, verbally, and with badge and credentials." The judge turned to Harris. "You didn't recognize a federal badge when it was shown to you?" He struggled. "I thought it was fake." "Did you attempt to verify it with dispatch? Call the agency listed?" "No." "Why not?" No answer. The judge closed the folder. "Then we have a problem, and not with Major Thompson." The entire courtroom had flipped. What started as a one-sided story of another angry black woman resisting had just unraveled into something far more dangerous. The lie was exposed, and the truth, the whole truth, had only just started speaking. As the courtroom broke for recess, the buzz was electric. Reporters whispered urgently into their phones, typing fast, eyes darting. It was no longer just a local traffic dispute. This was about power, lies, race, and rank. A black woman who had been wrongfully accused had just revealed herself as a federal officer, and not just any officer, a major, carrying secrets and responsibility far beyond the understanding of those who had tried to belittle her. Lila walked out with her head high, calm but alert. Her attorney trailed behind her, fielding questions with a cool refusal. "We will not be giving statements at this time," he said firmly, but cameras still followed. Flashbulbs popped. Someone shouted, "Is this about racism?" Another yelled, "Will the officer be fired?" Inside the building, Harris sat in a separate chamber, his lawyer now sweating beside him. Gone was the bravado. Gone was the sarcasm. In its place was a heavy realization that his reputation, his badge, and perhaps even his freedom were all now at stake. By the time the court resumed later that day, word had already spread. The video had leaked. Online news outlets were spinning fast. High-ranking officer wrongfully accused by local cop. Federal major reveals identity in court bombshell. Body cam off, truth on. How one woman exposed systemic abuse. The judge re-entered with visible purpose now. "I have reviewed all footage and documentation submitted," she said, her voice hard and precise. This court acknowledges that the claims made by Detective Harris are not only unfounded, but contradict visual evidence and federal records. Harris tried to shift in his seat, but the room felt like it was closing in. "Furthermore," she continued, "the court recognizes the failure to verify identification, the immediate escalation of force, and the repeated incident history associated with this officer. This behavior is not just negligence. It reflects systemic issues that must be addressed." There it was. The courtroom murmured in agreement. Some even clapped quietly. But it wasn't just this one incident. The judge's statement echoed what so many already felt, that these weren't one-time mistakes, but signs of a deeper pattern, one that too often went unchecked. Until now, Lila, still composed, sat quietly, but in her stillness was power. She didn't need to shout or cry. The truth had spoken louder than any defense Harris could have mounted. Outside the courthouse, things were changing too. News vans now lined the curb. Activists and retired officers had begun to show up. One woman held a sign that read. Another read. By the next morning, the police department issued a formal statement. Carefully worded, intentionally vague. "We are reviewing the matter and take these allegations seriously." But that wasn't enough. People weren't satisfied with carefully crafted apologies. People wanted accountability, and they were demanding it. City officials found themselves under fire. Emails poured in. Protests were planned. The mayor made a televised statement that evening, trying to stay neutral, but failing. Social media was flooded with clips from the courtroom. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Major Truth. Hashtag She Showed the Badge. Hashtag Harris Exposed. Detective Harris became the center of a storm he hadn't seen coming. Inside the department, things grew tense. Colleagues who once laughed at his off-color jokes now avoided him. Supervisors were asking questions. Internal Affairs had opened a case. And that was just the beginning. One officer, anonymously interviewed by a local station, said, "We've known Harris cuts corners. He thinks he's invincible. He messed with the wrong one this time." Meanwhile, Lila stayed quiet. She wasn't interested in being famous. She wasn't interested in revenge. Her only concern was that this never happen again. Not to her, and not to the next black woman walking to her car, wearing power in her presence alone. When asked why she hadn't pulled rank sooner, she reportedly said, "Because I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't need a badge for basic respect." That quote was printed everywhere. On posters, on stickers, on t-shirts, and maybe most importantly, in the minds of millions. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every unseen woman, every silenced voice, every individual who's ever been told, "You don't belong here," only to rise higher than anyone imagined. The days following the courtroom reveal were unlike anything the department had experienced before. Internally, leadership scrambled. Meetings ran late into the night. Public relations consultants were brought in. Words like transparency, retraining, and equity measures were suddenly on everyone's lips. But it was too late for damage control. This was no longer a quiet issue buried in paperwork and forgotten. This was front-page news. Every major outlet ran the story with chilling headlines. Detective Harris was suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. But that didn't satisfy the public. Protesters were no longer just local citizens. People flew in from other states. Civil rights groups took a stand. Veterans spoke out, some wearing their own medals and uniforms, demanding justice for Major Lila Brooks. A retired Army general even posted a statement that went viral. When one of our own is disrespected, dishonored, and dismissed because of her skin color, then the uniform has been dishonored. That officer didn't just fail her, he failed this country. The mayor was forced to order an independent inquiry. External investigators began reviewing not just this case, but every stop Harris had made in the last 5 years. And what they found was damning. Multiple incidents of excessive force. Complaints swept under the rug. Testimonies from citizens of color who had felt powerless, ignored, and dismissed. Patterns emerged. Harris had operated under the radar for too long, protected by silence, fear, and a culture of looking the other way. That culture was finally cracking. One of the most heart-wrenching moments came when a young man, barely 20, stepped forward in a televised interview, tears in his eyes, saying, "He pulled me over 3 years ago, slammed me on my own car, said I looked too confident to not be a threat. I filed a complaint. Nothing ever happened until now." That single statement stirred the nation, because it echoed the same arrogance Harris had displayed with Lila. The same assumption that confidence in a black body is a threat, that presence equals danger, and that no one will care if you say otherwise. But someone did care, and now so did millions. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, something unexpected happened. Colleagues who had once ignored Lila's complaints began reaching out. Emails, texts, quiet conversations in the hallways. Some apologizing, some thanking her, some admitting that they had seen similar things, but hadn't known how to fight it. Even officers from different cities began reaching out. "You gave us a voice," one woman wrote anonymously. "I didn't know I could speak up," another messaged her. The department tried to pivot. They offered Lila a public apology, formal, recorded, shared online. The police chief stood beside her at a press conference, acknowledging institutional failure and promising comprehensive reform. But Lila's face said everything. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply nodded once. Because apologies were not the end. They were just the beginning. After the conference, Harris himself, escorted by his lawyer and 2 fellow officers, requested a private meeting with Lila. She allowed it under supervision. He entered the room slowly, no badge, no gun, no smirk. Just a broken version of the man who had once tried to assert control over her. He began to speak, a rehearsed line of regret, explanation, deflection. But she raised her hand and stopped him. "You thought I was nobody," she said calmly. "You thought you could silence me, erase me, intimidate me. But I don't need your apology. What I needed was your respect, and you weren't capable of giving it." He stood frozen, mouth half open. Lila looked at the officers behind him, then back at him. "This isn't just about me. It's about all the people you did this to and thought would never be heard. Now, they have a voice, and that voice is louder than you'll ever be." With that, she stood and walked out, not with vengeance, but with dignity, because the reckoning wasn't about one man facing consequences. It was about a system being held accountable, a culture being forced to see what it had long ignored, a woman standing taller than the fear, the lies, the years of being second-guessed. And maybe, just maybe, it was about the beginning of something new. Months had passed since that explosive courtroom moment, yet its echoes still stirred the air like a quiet thunder, not loud, but ever-present. Detective Harris had been officially fired, stripped of his badge, and charged with perjury, obstruction of justice, and several civil rights violations based on new complaints and reopened cases. But this wasn't about his punishment anymore. This was about everything that happened because Lila stood her ground. For the first time in its history, the department installed a full civilian oversight board with power to investigate, intervene, and recommend disciplinary action. Racial sensitivity training wasn't just a checkbox anymore. It was transformed into something meaningful, led by activists, psychologists, and retired officers of color who had lived through it. A new policy required all officers to carry automatic voice recorders during stops, beyond just body cams. And those recordings would be reviewed monthly by independent watchdog teams. And just like that, silence stopped being safety. It became evidence. Parents started telling their children about Lila, not just as a symbol of strength, but as a reminder. You're not invisible. You're not powerless. You belong in every room, and no one can take that from you. News stations covered her story. Schools added her courtroom testimony into lessons about justice and equity. Law schools used the case as an example of how power could be both misused and reclaimed. She didn't just win in court. She became a catalyst. And as for Lila, she didn't return to the department, not because she was afraid, but because her mission had grown bigger. She created an initiative called Behind the Badge, Beyond the Bias, a national organization focused on helping officers of color, especially Black women, navigate the system, speak up, and rise through the ranks. She traveled city to city, meeting with police academies, sharing her story, training both rookies and veterans. Everywhere she went, there were people who stopped her, some with hugs, some with questions, many with tears. One woman, a new recruit from Georgia, once told her, voice trembling, "Almost quit before I started. Then I saw your video. I thought, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can be part of the change." That was all the reward Lila ever needed. She became a name that meant something, not because she chased the spotlight, but because she stood in it when it mattered. In one interview, when asked if she ever regretted confronting the officer in the courtroom, she replied simply, "If someone doesn't speak truth in that moment, then the lie wins. And I wasn't raised to let a lie win." And it was true. She had faced humiliation, silence, and injustice before. But this time, she chose to face it with power. That courtroom wasn't just where the lie fell apart. It became the place where truth stood taller than a badge. And when truth stands up, others rise with it. Today, Lila Brooks is often introduced as major, investigator, advocate, but above all, a woman who refused to be dismissed. She smiles when people call her a hero. But if you ask her what she calls herself, she usually just says, daughter, soldier, witness. Because witnessing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, is the first step to justice.